Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Levi Zane. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Levi Zane. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Welcome to another episode of HEROparanormal podcast. I am Ryan, the original outlaw of the airwaves, bringing you this VIP episode, broadcasting just south of Area 51 at the base of La Madre Mountain in the Silver State of Nevada. Our guest today is John Steiger, prolific writer of the UFO Trilogy, Dramas for the Stage. Talk about a barn burner. John really put a ton of research into this since 2010, and he mentions there may be a cover-up, but we're going to get into that and so much more, following up with what seems like an unfathomable amount of research John has put into these UFO cases, the three that we are going to talk about today. But before we do, have you been over to Hero Paranormal Podcast? HEROparanormal.com or Hero Paranormal on Facebook? If not, check it out. Also check out our science project, Space Wolf Research. You can find that at SWR on Facebook and spacewolfresearch.com. Just something we do for fun. This UFO Trilogy, Dramas for the Stage, John became inspired by the idea of a jury trial drama. And I think that's the best way to go about it, getting to the truth. With the audience as a jury, examining all the research that he's done since 2010 to get to the truth between the arguments. What an amazing way to guide prolific research into extensive theories, taking in the skeptics, weighing in all aspects. And, you just have to buy this. Check it out. Dramas for the Stage. The title, you can get this on Amazon. It is from the Flying Disc Press, the UFO Trilogy, Dramas for the Stage. Go to Amazon, pick up a copy. It's worth every penny. You go into the Rendlesham Forest incident, the Roswell, New Mexico incident, and the Brooklyn Bridge UFO investigation. All of them deeply, deeply researched. Definitely check that out. And in other news, we have some really cool Swapcast podcasts and patron podcasts that have been going on. If you haven't been to podbean.com, go over there and look up Hero Paranormal. We have a patron platform there. If you haven't been to Patreon, I went on there and I subscribed to 3 or 4 things. It's hard not to. It's the only way to really keep up with those you want to keep up with. And go to Patreon, and you can find Hero Paranormal there too now. We are also going to be on my friend Jim Perry. If you haven't gone to Euphomet, check out Euphomet. Great podcast. He recommended Anchor. So I'm going to take his recommendation, and I'm going to cruise over to Anchor and see what's up there. So yeah, keep up with us on all those platforms, and actually go to YouTube and subscribe to Hero Paranormal on YouTube. Things that are hard to dispute in these cases are many, whether it's the Brooklyn Bridge UFO investigation, whether it is the Rendlesham Forest investigation, which is British version of Roswell, with distinct differences, or whether it's the Motherlode, the Roswell investigation. With no further ado, the only guy you can ask about the three and get the most information, prolific writer, inspired researcher, but most importantly, overall good guy, John Steiger. Welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. It's great to finally talk to you. I've been just fascinated by your book. I love everything about it. The research that you have put into this since 2010 is staggering. And the prolific writing is, well, it's just so amusing and great. I love it, everything. And I wanted to ask, let's see, I had a ton of questions, John. Well, let's start at the beginning. How did you first become interested in UFOs?
Well, that's a bit of a long story, but I blame my mother-in-law for that. She was an insomniac, but she didn't watch TV at night. Instead, she listened to the radio. And she started out listening to Larry King, who I wasn't so much interested in him. And then he went to TV, So then she switched over to Art Bell and his UFOs and paranormal. And then she would regale me with tales of what was going on in the Art Bell show, and then also inform me how sad she was that I had to work during the day, and so I couldn't possibly stay up and listen to Art Bell at night. But I decided to show her up, and I went to sleep with the radio on, and at times, you wake up in the middle of the night, and I would be listening to Art Bell, and I got snippets here and there all through the years of Art Bell and Linda Moulton Howe, Richard C. Hoagland, and all his famous people he had on there. So anyway, that was an introduction to UFOs. I was doing other things, though, at the time, like writing fiction and actually directed 2 movies, very low-budget movies, and so that took up quite a bit of time. But eventually, I got out of all that, and I went to 2 conferences in Washington, D.C., one in 2010, and then the Citizens Hearing in 2013, and then eventually I went out of town and went to the Roswell UFO Conference, which is held annually around the 4th of July in Roswell, New Mexico. And I really had a good time out there. That was in 2015. And I drove out, and on the drive back, I got the idea that wouldn't it be interesting to put the pro-UFO Roswell witnesses up against the anti-UFO Roswell witnesses. And so I came up with the idea of a jury trial, and in fact, the audience acts as the jury, and I think that's a very interesting facet. When you attend the play, you would get with your playbill, you would get a juror ballot, and actually get to fill it out at the conclusion of the play. And then the ushers would take it, and it'd be tabulated during the accolades and closing with the actors. And then finally, the judge would come out, and he would render the verdict. Well, the 2 sides were the plaintiff was Citizens for UFO Disclosure. Now, that's a fictional name for a group, but there's a lot of UFO groups with similar names to that. So it lends a great aura of authenticity to it. And so anyway, they present 10 first-hand witnesses, witnesses with first-hand knowledge of what went on at Roswell. Now, none of these witnesses has the full picture because Roswell was such a big case. But if you put together what those 10 witnesses can testify to, it'll provide you with a pretty full picture of what happened and why there's belief that Roswell was a UFO crash, a legitimate UFO crash. On the other hand, the United States Air Force has done its best to try to deny that any actual UFO crash occurred. And they put out 2 reports in the 1990s. Both of these reports were hundreds of pages long. Now it boils down to about 5 witnesses, but 2 of them are kind of redundant to one of the others. So I really left them have 3 primary witnesses, which is all that their reports really rely upon. And then, there's a lot of evidence that they drum up in the report for their stance that there was no UFO crash. So anyway, and there's attorneys for both sides, and they put up objections throughout, and they have opening statements and closing arguments. And once that is done, then the judge reads jury instructions to the audience, or would be to the reader. You would read that, and then you can render your verdict on what you think happened at Roswell. But the idea is, this play puts the entire Roswell case into a nutshell. Now, it's not totally comprehensive, because a play of this sort is meant to be taken over the course of one afternoon or one evening. And if you did the entirety and all the evidence of Roswell, you're talking days, if not weeks, and like an OJ trial or something to that effect. So anyway, this puts Roswell into a nutshell for those who want a good introduction to what happened there. You'll have an understanding once you read this play, and so that's what I did once I got home. Now, it took me 9 or 10 months to review the literature. I had to buy a lot of it and whatever, and make notes, made extensive notes, and then 2 or 3 months to write the play. Now, each of these plays of the 3 in my trilogy has a bibliography, so that all my sources are there, and you can reference them if you want for further reading. There's also an extensive series of endnotes, and there's over 850 endnotes in all 3 plays, so that these plays are all very well referenced with factual references, and you can see where everything has been comes from that's being presented to you. And lastly, there's also an index for each play, so if there was some tidbit or trivia or even an important item that you were interested in, and you had gone through the play and weren't sure where it was, you can use the index for handy reference and get right to the page where the information is that you want.
Yes, what an amazing way that you've chosen to guide your research. And as you mentioned, John, over 850 endnotes, and talk about the sources, the images, and the way that you just kind of put the person there. I love the images. I love everything you've done here. And our guest today, John Steiger, prolific writer of the UFO Trilogy, Dramas for the Stage. John, I wanted to kind of focus back and go into some of that research, because it really is detailed. And I like how you delved into even the characters that are in the courtroom drama, and real characters that had real experiences, said real things under oath, whether that, we'll get into that. And that's kind of what I wanted to discuss, is how you got your inspiration, obviously, the Roswell trial, the courtroom drama. And I also wanted to ask, the play in general. Could we go into some of that detail?
Sure. What I did was I took every book. Now, I did books, pretty much as limited on Roswell, because there's so much literature on it. I did books, by like Kevin Randall, Don Schmidt, Tom Carey. John Price wrote a book on it. And then there's a lot of other, like kind of one-ofs. Let me look at the bibliography a second so I can...
It's amazing. Man.
Okay. Don Berliner and Stanton Friedman wrote an early book on it. Charles Berlitz and William Moore wrote the first book on it. There's a book about intimate interviews with Jesse Marcel by Linda Corley. And then not only did I do that side, I also did not just the two Air Force reports. One of them is by Colonel Richard Weaver and First Lieutenant James McAndrew, called the Roswell Report: Fact versus Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. And then two years later, McAndrew alone did a follow-up report, the Roswell Report: Case Closed. Now, these were both done right before the 50th anniversary of Roswell, because Roswell was big in the news and the Air Force was trying to quash it. But anyway, then there's also Philip Klass, Cal Korff, and Flock. Carl Flock were three skeptics who, at least Flock is not always a skeptic, but he's a skeptic towards Roswell, it turned out. They wrote important skeptical books, which support the Air Force's position. So, and the play is dedicated to the investigators of the Roswell crash, both sides, both the pro-UFO side and the anti-UFO side, the two Air Force gentlemen and also those three skeptics I mentioned. I'm trying to give equal time to both sides here. So because it's important that we examine the evidence and fairly in order to get to the truth, because that's what we're really trying to get to here. What was the truth that happened at Roswell?
Yes, I agree. There's a lot of truth in, I think, mixed into your research, John. And you mentioned the three skeptics wrote very important books as far as the Air Force perspective. And, these people that were working for the Air Force and the skeptics, there's a lot of cases where I think people brought a lot of baggage in possibly with them, whether it's their job and, that not that would affect the truth, but it may affect the way they filter the truth when speaking to others. Is that true?
I think that Air Force reports are definitely slanted. I think the Air Force had a preordained outcome that they wanted to present. The Air Force claims they looked at and did an investigation and came up with the truth. I reject that personally. I believe they had it. This happened at the time of the event. They put out the press release stating that they had a saucer, and then they took it back a day later with their cover-up done by General Ramey out of Fort Worth. He came up with a very brilliantly clever cover-up. We believe those were on orders from the Pentagon itself. And so this has been their stance all along, to deny that anything important happened, even though there's just an awful lot of evidence that would be against the Air Force's position. And that's what I try to portray on the plaintiff's side of the case.
And I think you do a good job of that, and especially the scenarios. And I just wanted to double check. The Air Force witnesses, that was Sheridan Cavett. I hope I'm saying that right.
That's correct.
Irving Newton and Dr. Charles Moore, for our listeners that aren't familiar. And talk about a barn burner. The UFO Trilogy is, John, this is your first publication, and you've put a ton of research into this. You, since 2010, and you mentioned that there may have been a cover-up of sorts. Could we go a little bit into detail, not taking away from, I want to move on and get into the Rendlesham stuff as well, but could we go into that a little bit, maybe that there is a cover-up?
Yeah, there's an overall general cover-up by the military against UFOs. I mean, I don't know if you want to consider, this news that's been breaking lately, about the Air Force carriers and all that as somewhat breaking it up. I really haven't studied that extensively and not really in a position to testify to that. But historically, going back to 47 with Roswell, there's been denial of UFO activity on the military's part, and in particular the Air Force. The Air Force is the lead service with this over the Army, Navy, or Marines. Just because, they're dealing with the flying, and most of the UFOs are up in the sky, or come from the sky. So anyway, yeah, there's this, but the cover-up at Roswell is they put out the press release, and it's arguable that the press release should never have been put out, that it was a big mistake. But the base, the Roswell base was kind of like a satellite, or it's not, the larger base was at Fort Worth Army Airfield, which is, a town next to Dallas. And Roswell is extremely important, though, because the nuclear bombers were based there. When we bombed, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Trinity site in New Mexico is where they did testing out of Roswell and whatnot. But anyway, the headquarters for that branch of the Air Force was out of Fort Worth Army Airfield in Texas. And so then they took over because the Roswell people put out the press release. The Pentagon saw this. They said, no, this can't be, that we can't have this. And so then the General Ramey there, and this is all detailed. There's a General Ramey was deceased, and he probably would have never come forth anyway because he was, very much on the Air Force side. But there is a very good witness who was the kind of like the lieutenant here, Brigadier General Thomas Jefferson DuBose. He was right below Ramey and there on the scene. And he actually came forth in his old age and admitted that it was a cover-up. Wow. Now, the one thing he never admitted was that it was UFOs, because he claimed he never saw the material itself. And that could very well be true. I mean, the UFO material was kept to, the fewest and smallest amount of people. But he said that weather balloon that was presented to the press the day or so after the press release was not the Roswell debris. Wow.
Big stuff. That's really big stuff. And
it is.
It's interesting. I wanted to ask you a bit, John, and this is about your trip to Roswell. And, not that the average question, I'm not going to ask the average question. You may have seen something, John, possibly, or witnessed something that changed your perceptions on things. Can we go a little bit into that?
You mean the shadow being sighting?
Yes, sir. The Humphrey Bogart type shadowy figure, please. Yes.
Okay. That occurred after my first trip to Roswell. On the first night out of Roswell, actually the morning. Roswell ended on Sunday. I spent the night in Roswell at the hotel, and then left early in the morning, beginning my journey back home. I decided to go a different way than the way I had come into town. I went a less direct way, but I wanted, I don't know, I just felt like doing something, seeing, not that you could see much when in the darkness, but just going a different route through New Mexico. New Mexico is called the land of enchantment, and it's called that for good reason. It has so many UFO sightings, but not only does it have a UFO sighting, for me it had, and I've never seen a UFO myself. I've never seen that anywhere in my life. I have very bad vision, so it's not surprising. I stargaze very well either. But I happened to see this shadow being. This was on Monday, July 6th, 2015. I believe it was between these are small towns or small cities, Capitan, New Mexico, and Carrizozo, New Mexico, on U.S. Route 380. And this occurred approximately 4:30 in the morning. Now, I had gotten up at 3 a.m., as was my practice on a travel day, because I got up at 2 a.m. and I'm out, in my car, having done the dogs and everything, and had my hotel room coffee. I make the hotel room coffee, the foul tasting stuff, but it has caffeine in it. So that's my first coffee of the day. I get on the road at 3 o'clock, and between 3 and 7 you can make incredible time, before morning traffic gets on the road. So anyway, I was driving from Roswell up to Denver, but I went across the state of New Mexico over to Interstate 25, and that I would hit 25 a little bit below Socorro, New Mexico, where there was another UFO incident in the 60s. But anyway, and then take 25 up to Denver. Okay, so it's 3 a.m. I'm out, and by 4:30 I was going about 60 to 65 miles per hour, and I'm out in the middle of nowhere. Literally, it's ranch land, but it's not really good grassland. It's not like like Kansas or Nebraska or the really good prairie land. New Mexico's more scrub land. Now they have sheep and whatnot, but it's not as good because it just simply doesn't get as enough moisture to be as fertile. So anyway, I'm driving through this type of area. It's a 2-lane road, and as I said, I was going 60 to 65 in the car, but I was wide awake having had the coffee. Okay, I happened, as I'm coming up to, driving along the road, I happened to see on the left side of the road a figure that was entirely in black. I mean black as coal. You know how the night is a gloom, and it's a gloom that the headlights can penetrate. This figure, this coal black figure, the light of the headlights did not penetrate it. It went around it so that you saw it was a distinctive figure. Now, there were only 3 things that I made out on that figure, and that was it had a hat shaped like a fedora. I immediately thought of Humphrey Bogart in like The Big Sleep or The Maltese Falcon, when he would, he'd dress in his hat and his trench coat. And it also, the trench coat was the other component that it seemed like it was a trench coat. I suppose it could possibly have been a shroud, but I got that. And then I had the head, which was between the trench coat, of course, and the hat. And the only thing you could make out on the head was there was a place for the nose. You could make out the nose. You could not make out eyes, ears, no distinctive characteristics like race, ethnicity, sex, even were, or hair, were, you just couldn't see that. It was all black. So anyway, I saw it. I was about 20 to 30 yards from it when I first noticed it. It immediately dematerialized into like a light energy beam and zipped across the highway, both traveling from the left shoulder across both lanes of the highway, and then rematerialized immediately in the exact same shape and form. And, you know, the detective shape and coal black figure on the other side of the highway, and then I went zipping past. That took, my estimation, less than 2 seconds. I would say that it went across the road. Now, this was some daring. I'm in a car going 60, 65. If that's a solid thing, I could smack into it pretty well. But I was 20 to 30 yards when it first happened, and by the time it was on the other side, I was 10 to 20 yards from it. So in the time I went 10 yards, it dematerialized, streaked across, and rematerialized on the other side of the road. And then I went on past. Now, it took me about 10 minutes, I estimate, or say 10 miles down the road to process what happened. Because you're not expecting this, especially at 4:30 in the morning out in the middle of nowhere. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. I was wide awake. Wow. And I thought about turning around, and I said to myself, I'm not going to be able to find the spot if it's not there. Because it's not. There's nothing distinctive, about this landscape. There really isn't, and it's pitch dark. It's out of my way, and thirdly, what if it's there? I don't want to mess with a shadow being. I'm not. What do I want with it? It got across the road in front of me. There was no accident or anything. It went its way. I'm going my way. I'm not bothering it. It's not bothering me. Let bygones be bygones, and I kept going.
Yeah, I would have done the same thing. Amazing experience, though. I can't function without...
2 seconds out of my entire life, I've had paranormal experience. 2 whole seconds.
Wow. Well, it's I can't function without that cheap hotel coffee either, so it's a good thing you had that. Maybe you would have missed it. This is Socorro, New Mexico, and Interstate 25, 4:30 in the morning, middle of nowhere.
No. I hadn't gotten to Socorro. I hadn't gotten to 25. It's not the interstate. It's US 380. 2-lane road. 1 lane one way, 1 lane the other way. I mean, it's not a big road. Probably within 100 miles of the interstate, but probably somewhere maybe more than 50 miles, I bet, from the interstate. I mean, this is really I was going west. Okay, the interstate goes north-south. I was going general direction west. When the shadow being was on the south side of the road, and it went north across the road. I was going east to west, so it crossed my path.
Wow, it reminds me a lot of The Shadow, I think was the name of the radio show.
Yes. I'm not familiar with The Shadow. I haven't seen there was a movie, I think, and I haven't heard the radio show, but essentially it was a shadow. But the headlights did not penetrate it. It was different. Oh, and the other thing is, there were no legs. And it seemed to be higher, like it was off the ground already. Like, I didn't have the sense that it was standing on the ground. I had the sense that it was floating, okay? And so it was, higher than the average human being. I mean, if it had legs and whatever and was on the ground, then it would be, say, man size. or, tall woman size, but it seemed to me to be a little higher off the ground because it went straight across. You see, it was, anyway, it just seemed to be like hovering there.
Fascinating. Exactly like that radio show. Yeah, that is something that, with any luck, I think anybody that sees something like that is going to be even more inspired, which makes sense because this is such an amazing, and that's why I hate to move on from the Roswell, but let's go.
Well, it's astonishing. It was an astonishing experience. So anyway.
Oh, completely. And I think I found the shadow. Let me see if this is it. One moment. Sweet.
Shadow, no.
Yeah, that's the one. I remember hearing that with my late grandfather. I mean, but yeah, okay. Very interesting. The moving on. I hate to leave it, but Rendlesham Forest is so amazing too. Can't leave Peniston and Burroughs out of this because this is such a supporting UFO. Can we go into that case a little bit, John?
Yes, of course. Rendlesham Forest is like the English or British version of Roswell. Now it's better documented than Roswell because Roswell was a hidden case. It happened in 1947 and they hushed it up and it didn't come out again for about 30 years. But Rendlesham Forest has been there pretty much from the beginning. It came out, there were twin U.S. Air Force bases in England. This is in southeast England, not far off the coast. The idea was this was part of NATO and our defense against Eastern Europe and Russia trying to come in, and like blitzkrieg or something over Western Europe. And so, but we didn't have our, planes and stuff right on the border where Russia was. We had them back in England, but those things, they're fast moving and we can get there in a relatively quick amount of time. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we have these two bases, and this occurred on 3 successive nights. It was Christmas night, Boxing Day morning. Boxing Day is the day after Christmas in England. It's also a holiday. And then Boxing Day night, and the 27th morning, and then December 27th night, and the morning of the 28th, all in 1980. On the first night, Burroughs and another Air Force, I believe it was a Sergeant Steffens, mm-hmm. They were touring the base. They didn't have like guys guarding the guard post. They toured around it because they didn't feel like we're going to be under attack, because we're right in England and whatever, Mm-hmm. So anyway, this is how they did security, and they patrolled it in vehicles, and so they happened as they were at this. They had checkpoints, and they came to. It's called Eastgate. Is the checkpoint. One of the famous books about it is called Left at Eastgate, although that's been very much debunked. Even the pro-UFO community has debunked Left at Eastgate book. So anyway, they saw something go down, a light go down at a measured pace into Rendlesham Forest. They went off base, and this is a highly unusual procedure. Normally, they don't go off base. They went off base into the forest to investigate it, and they saw lights there, and the lights seemed to be coming towards them. So then they said, "You know what? We need backup." So they literally backed up in their vehicle, and then went back to the Eastgate, and then they phoned in. To get reinforcements and higher ranking security. And that was in the form of Jim Peniston. He was the main security person on duty that night. So he came to the East Gate along with another guy who Kavancic, and so Stephens stayed at the gate. Peniston, Burroughs, and Kavancic went off to investigate, and they all went off in one vehicle. They also checked their weapons because you're not allowed to take weapons onto English soil. That's part of the basis agreement. Okay, they go in and they left Kavancic back for radio relay because they wanted to be in touch with the main base, and radio relay communications were being interfered with. This is one of the first indications that you may have a UFO event, because communications and car engines and things are often disrupted by UFO activity.
Right.
So anyway, then Burroughs and Peniston come up, and they're within about 50 meters of the light, and the light is incredibly intense. And anyway, Peniston manages to approach it. There was an explosion at one point. They hit the dirt. When they got up, Burroughs ended up being engulfed in light and in kind of a catatonic state. He couldn't move, and he was just kind of like at a standstill. And he doesn't have great recall as to what happened on that night from that point on until they came out of it. But Peniston went up, and he tried to take photos, but the military claims they were all fog. That is possible if there was any radiation. There was traces of radiation found afterwards, so that they might not be fibbing about that. But then he also wrote in his notebook, drew the symbols that was on the craft, and then he actually touched the craft, and the craft was incredibly smooth except for the symbols and they felt like sandpaper, rough. And then he went to the biggest symbol. There was one row of symbols, like 4 symbols, and then there was a big symbol above it. He touched the big symbol and had a download into his mind suddenly of a binary code of zeros and ones, just a stream of zeros and ones. And this is his allegation. This is his claim as to what happened. I'm just reporting on that. So then a day or two later, Peniston wrote down this binary code in his notebook. It was a small notebook that he used. It's an official notebook that he had. It filled up 15 pages with zeros and ones. Mm-hmm. And this has been translated as a message from humans in the year 8100. And it gives some... the main part of the message is it lists coordinates on Earth to various places. One of them is a mythical island, or an island that doesn't exist now, off the coast of Ireland, called High Brazil. There were a bunch of other ones. I don't know them, from memory. There's one in China. There's one at Socorro, or it's the place in Sedona, Arizona. There's one, I think, in Central America. There's one around the Egypt pyramids, etc. The thing that I have a problem with in that is that this message was translated from a bunch of zeros and ones. You look at you can find the zeros and ones in the notebook pages. They're on the internet. They're in the literature. And how they translate this into this message, that's a little beyond me, and also I don't dwell on it with the play, so I don't focus on the binary code, but I do focus on him encountering the ship, And then they found also with Burroughs, how Burroughs found the landing, because they had gone past it, because when it flew off at incredible speed, they attempted to follow it, but they weren't successful in that. And then they came back, and then they saw Burroughs found the impressions where the craft had been, and also the broken tree branches and where it had gone off and come in and whatnot. And so then that's pretty much sums up the first night. The second night is not well known because, again, they saw a craft go into the forest. Two airmen left the base. One of them was a female lieutenant, and then there was a sergeant who also went. It's not even known for sure that they went together. They may well have come off separately. It's also been speculated that the female lieutenant took her weapon off base and may have shot it, may have lost it off base. In any event, she purportedly had a breakdown, a mental breakdown, and had to leave the service. But again, all of this is secondhand testimony. Neither her nor the other gentleman, the sergeant, have come forward and given firsthand testimony to my knowledge. And so I did not include an act on that. It's a 3-act play that I have. The first is Peniston. The second is what Burroughs said, which, he fills in what Peniston said. And then he also was out on the third night. So he's a good introduction to Colonel Holt's investigation. Colonel Holt on the third night, they had 2 nights of this, and an airman breaking down and whatnot. And he was the deputy commander of the base, second in charge. Well, what happens when you're second in charge? Well, the first in charge orders you to go do the dirty work. So he had to go out and in a patrol in the middle of the night when it's quite cold. This was, December in Britain. And he led 4 other patrolmen. I mean, there were a bunch of others at a staging area off base, but they were kept to the staging area for the most part. And they went off, and the first place they went was they did radiation measurements at the site where Peniston and Burroughs had their encounter. Then a UFO, a red blinking UFO with a black pupil, came from the field which is next to Rendlesham Forest. Rendlesham Forest is in a relatively rural area of England, and there's actual farming adjacent to it, and there was a field next to there, and a UFO came out of the field into the forest and was zigzagging through the trees. In other words, it was under very knowledgeable power. I'm not explaining that exactly right, but
intelligent control.
In other words, it was directed. Wow. It wasn't like just a probe or whatever.
Right.
So anyway, it was. It came and they saw this UFO. They followed it back out into the field. It silently exploded into small white orbs, and they flew off up into the sky. And the next thing they know, they decided that to continue going, they went around the farmhouse into a field on the other side of the farm. In fact, it could have been, they went into a third field, and that could have been a different farm. And anyway, they saw up there an object way up in the sky, came toward them, and beamed down a beam at their feet. Not at them, because it probably could have hit them and maybe injured them, but it came down at their feet. They're not sure if what this was, a warning, a sign, or what exactly, how to interpret that. Then and that lasted for about 5 seconds, and it was a very pencil-thin beam, very thin beam. And then the object went over and started shooting down beams. Now, you have to understand, they were out in the country, and this is a big area. So they were some miles from the other base, which is called Bentwaters. They were by Woodbridge base, and the Bentwaters is the other base. And Bentwaters was a base that had nuclear weapons stored on it. And these nuclear weapons were, they thought the object was beaming down beams at the nuclear weapon facility on the base, not setting off the nuclear weapons. No nuclear weapons went off, but checking them out for some reason. I mean, there's, the reason why they think Roswell happened so soon after World War II is that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those nuclear explosions, were observed from far distances, and that brought Earth to the attention of the aliens. And so then they came here, and they've been, there's a great book about nukes and UFOs out there, and the aliens have had a lot of encounters at nuclear bases throughout the world.
Yeah, I believe that there is a lot of truth to that. And, another interesting thing is it's, like you said, they're miles from Bentwater. It's the 1980s. These twin Air Force bases, we've had 2 people break down, a female and I believe Holt. And 3 nights, even first night, broken tree branches, second night. I mean, by the time the third night happened, this gets really intense. And I wanted to ask you, John, the light being incredibly intense and these orbs into the sky, these things really remind me of Uinta Basin, Utah type things that we see. And I'll go into that with you.
Did you say something about Utah?
Yes. The lights that they reported it sounds like something similarly seen, those orbs into the sky, the tiny white ones, and I'll go into detail about that with you.
Okay.
But the first question I wanted to ask is, I'm with you on the binary code, and I've gone to the purported GPS coordinates, what's up with the message in some way. I went to the one near Sedona, Arizona, and, it was private property. Jumping forward to those lights, in your research, did they experience any emotions with these lights?
Emotions with the lights. I honestly can't think of an emotional tie to the lights right at the moment.
Okay.
There were. Let me say a couple things just about the binary code.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that the message is not true. I'm not saying that. It well may be that's what the binary code means. I just have trouble with how zeros and ones translate to that message. It's the translation that I question. And I'm not saying it doesn't have any meaning. It probably does, but it just seems like an amazing translation. That's all. And the other thing I just want to point out is that book that I was referenced about UFO and nukes. I did research that for the Rendlesham Forest play. It's by Robert Hastings, UFO and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapons Sites. It's a great book. It's not the mainstay of Rendlesham Forest, but there's a chapter on Rendlesham Forest, and there's a lot of other great information there about UFOs and nukes.
I can't agree more. A good friend of mine, Dave Rosenfeld, has talked to me about the coincidences, quote unquote, with these UFOs and nukes. And that book by Robert Hastings is a good one. And I've become a believer, John. Another quick question before we jump to the next case. was you mentioned Peniston tried to take photos, and they all came out foggy. Were you able?
He didn't see them. That's what the photo lab told him.
That answers my question.
The photo lab said they came out fogged.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was radiation readings at the site where he took the photos. It's my understanding that radiation can fog photos, so it might be accurate. It also might be part of the cover-up. It's unknown, but the photos have never come out.
Okay. And the last question, Colonel Halt, I believe, wrote a sanitized memorandum for the official record, but I believe he also made a tape recording of the third night's events. Did anything come out on that, or were you able to witness that?
Is vital. The tape is vital evidence. It's direct involvement. The shoot down of the beam is on the tape. It can't be denied.
Wow.
It happened on the tape. Unless you're saying that those guys on that tape are liars. And this is a colonel, he was a lieutenant colonel at the time, but became a colonel and became base commander of those two bases, and then had another important position at the Pentagon after that. And also, it's not just him, the sergeant. It's the same sergeant who was out the second night. That sergeant is on the tape. He actually muttered an expletive because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And so it's not. It's one thing to say witnesses, but it's also witnesses on tape. Mm-hmm. So the encounter, and also the encounter with the red object with the black pupil. That encounter is on tape.
Yeah.
So, the tape is vital. The memorandum, to be quite honest, it demonstrates something happened, but the thing is, it's a sanitized, cleaned up version. Mm-hmm. There's also were affidavits given by Peniston, Burroughs, and three other guys who were out there on the first night. The problem with those is, again, they were afraid for their careers. They're afraid, they can't tell the whole truth, because if they do, they may say, well, you know what, you're going to wash out for this, or you're going to, have to go to the crazy house for a little bit of, need psychology. You know what I'm saying? That they just can't take it at face value, the full truth, the whole truth. Mm-hmm. So the writings are one thing, but the tape is just, it's pretty vital evidence. It's one of the best pieces of UFO evidence out there.
I agree, and I think that, the skeptics on this one just missed the boat. I mean, they're alleging it's a meteor, rabbit holes, the Oz effect, autokinesis, and above all, a lighthouse. This is an obvious win, I think, for Colonel Holt, and it's amazing. For the sake of time, John, I'm going to move on to the Brooklyn Bridge UFO investigation. It's so fascinating.
Yes. Another important case, so we need to cover it.
Yeah, could you give our listeners kind of some background about that? And it is got some of the neatest, I believe, amazing writing. Just because
Thank you.
Yeah, could we go into detail about that?
Second act. Okay. A woman claims she was abducted by aliens out of her apartment right through the closed window, floated out. The aliens came into her apartment, and this was on November 30th, 1989. She ended up in the company of who it's later claimed is the United Nations Secretary General, who's the highest political position in the entire world, and his two bodyguards. The two bodyguards are the first two men, and the third man is how they refer to the Secretary General. That Secretary General was Javier Perez de Cuellar. Perez de Cuellar officially denies that anything happened. He says, I was in bed asleep that night. But he also sent a letter on UN stationery, and it looks exactly, I shouldn't say he sent a letter. Bud Hopkins has a letter which is on UN stationery, in the form of a known letter of de Cuellar and signed by what looks to be a de Cuellar signature saying that, yes, it's true, we were abducted by aliens, but I have to officially deny it, and I will continue to officially deny it. Okay, so
Wow.
that's just one of the many contradictions in this case. There's problems with the main witness. She's made some claims. It seems like they're embellished. There's also some things that are hard to disprove, too. So it looks like we have a real mix here of truth and fantasy, shall we say. Now, Bud Hopkins was a famous UFO investigator. He investigated the case. Linda Cortile is the main civilian she is, her hypnotic regressions, which is a technique used by Bud Hopkins to get at the truth of alien abduction. That's the first act of the play. You have them acted out. In the second act of the play, Bud Hopkins, an independent filmmaker who took the film of these regressions hypnotic regressions were filmed for later use and reference and whatnot. Just like Hulse had his tape, these are on videos. So that person in the play is called Carla Roberts. It's a fictional name. I'm not naming the real person at this time. But they took great offense. Over time, they came to not believe in this case and have real doubts about alien abduction. So anyway, there's a tremendous debate among these three principals in the second act, particularly the two women. These are two great roles for, if there's any actresses out there who would be interested in a great role, either Carla Roberts or Linda Cortile is the role for you. You need to check out this play, Will to Believe, the Brooklyn Bridge UFO investigation. It's all takes place on a stage, and it's very actor-centric, this play. And then the UN Secretary General appears as a kind of a background character. But mainly, the play revolves around what happened allegedly. I'm going to say allegedly happened with the Brooklyn Bridge UFO investigation by Bud Hopkins of these alien abductions. But what it comes down to, and what I use this for, is a probe of the ultimate question of the UFO experience, and that is your mind open to the possibility, or is it closed? In other words, do you have the will to believe in UFOs? Do you have that will to believe? If you do, then you can get to, it's a prerequisite to getting to belief in UFOs. If you don't, if your mind is closed, then as far as I'm concerned, you are not going to be able to get to belief in UFOs. And you may be closing off the truth.
Amen,
That's
brother.
When the will to believe fails, you are closing off the truth.
Wow. Amen.
That's what I am trying to get at with the writing of this play.
And wow, this is amazing. I mean, the UN Secretary General, Bud Hopkins, we have Javier denying anything happened, but yet the admitted possible alien abduction through another letter that Bud has. This things that are hard to dispute in the case. It is amazing, John. And I think that your last two ending scenes and the summations of the experience are amazing. To me, your ultimate question perfectly kind of sums up the podcast. It's so true. Is your mind open to the possibility, or is it closed? Where can our listeners keep up with you and what you're doing and help you along your journey of bringing us this amazing stuff?
Well, okay, first of all, the book's available on Amazon. You can get it either in a tangible, large paperback copy or electronic version, which is really inexpensive. Either one. if you want to talk to me, you can. I'm going to give you my email: JOHNSTEIGER 2001@gmail.com. That's John Steiger 2001@gmail.com.
Wow. Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you so much, John. It's just amazing. And I wish we could just talk for hours. And I'm hoping you have a great weekend. And I hope to talk to you soon, my friend.
Steiger. Thanks very much. I enjoyed it. I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Wow. What a barn burner. John Steiger, bringing the heat. And I'll tell you what, it's in my opinion, a defeat to those who don't believe. 3 amazing cases. Amazing cases. And the research that John's gone to is just unbelievable. You know, there is so much real-life drama that is detailed in the research that I think it really becomes the will to believe. And his ultimate question of whether your mind is open or not to the possibility. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Look, Visine for the third eye. It's levels and you can catch me where the birds fly. Blast off in the time machine, blowing on that light green straight line of beams. Beezy, take it easy what they tell me. Boy, I'm so deep, not even Lucifer can help me. And I'm going so hard, not even Lucifer can stop me. Talking bitches, Somali, Maseratis, and paparazzi. Going kamikaze as soon as a nigga trip. 2-step, I do mines like this. DeLorean, historian, her story. We partying back to the future like Michael J. Fox. I throw that cock, she feel some type of way. She hot, but it ain't gon' change a thing with this pimpin'. I ain't with that simping. Can't you see we on a mission, baby? Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like